They laughed before the inspection even began. Not loud enough for the sergeants to hear, just whispers sharp enough to cut. And all of it was aimed at one cadet in the line, Elena Kessler. The October air at Blackstone Yard. The parade ground inside Camp Iron Dagger was cold enough to frost breath. The Rockies loomed behind the wire, jagged and merciless. Rows of shadow cadet candidates stood rigid in formation, boots polished, collars stiff, ribbons aligned by the manual. Every uniform looked brand new. Every uniform, except hers. Sound off. Cadets, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments and let us see how far this unit reaches. And don't forget to subscribe. Stories unseen, more untold missions are coming, and you won't want to miss them. Elena tugged once at her sleeve. The fabric was worn, softened by years of careful washing. It wasn't issue gear. It was her father's, altered by her grandmother's hands. Worn because her family couldn't afford a new one, and because she refused to let his service fade into a chest of silence. The moment she stepped onto the yard, the others had seen it and smelled weakness. "Check out Kessler's costume," Cadet Blake Monroe muttered. The general's son, smug and broad-shouldered. Cadet Harris Dalton smirked. "Surplus store chic. Look at that blur on her sleeve. Doesn't even look like a real patch. It wasn't a stain. It was a patch, its falcon emblem almost erased by time. Her father had worn it on missions he never spoke about, and her mother only ever called classified. Now, in the sharp mountain sun, that was what they mocked. Elena's face burned, but her eyes stayed locked forward. Shadow cadet training drilled one truth above all: bearing is what you show when the world tries to break you. She didn't flinch, didn't speak. She breathed shallow and steady while their whispers cut at her. Then the low growl of an engine rolled across the yard. A black sedan stopped at the platform, and silence followed. Colonel Reagan Vale stepped out, dress blues immaculate, posture like a steel rod wrapped in command. Her reputation traveled faster than she did an officer who could wash out a candidate with one look, but also one who found potential in the least likely. The yard snapped to attention. Elena's stomach knotted. If Monroe and Dalton had mocked her, what would Vale say when she saw this relic jacket, this patch no one recognized? Vale began her march down the line, shoes striking pavement like a metronome of judgment. She adjusted ribbons, corrected posture, nodded once at Dalton, once at Monroe. Approval. And then she stopped in front of Elena. The colonel's eyes swept the uniform once, twice. No expression. But her gaze lingered on the patch longer than routine. Her thumb brushed the edge almost unconsciously, like someone touching an old scar. For a breath, the yard seemed to freeze. "Cadet Kessler," Vale said, her voice cutting the silence. "Step forward." Elena's heart slammed once against her ribs. This was it. Elena's boots struck concrete as she obeyed. One step forward, then stillness. She fixed her eyes ahead. Monroe folded his arms. Dalton smirked, both convinced she was seconds from humiliation. Vale circled her like a hawk. The brass buttons, slightly dulled with age, the hand-stitched seams no quartermaster would allow. And finally, the patch. Her gaze lingered. Once bright, now a ghost of color. The falcon barely visible. Vale's face gave nothing away. But the silence she created pulled the yard tight. Even the wind seemed to pause. "Cadet Kessler," she asked at last, "where did you acquire this uniform?" "It belonged to my father." "Ma'am, Major Gabriel Kessler." "Deceased." A flicker crossed Vale's eyes, gone in an instant. But real. She stepped closer, tone softer by a fraction. "And this patch." She pressed, fingertip brushing the faded thread. "Do you know what it represents?" Elena forced herself not to shrink. "No, ma'am. My father never explained. My mother said it was classified." The word traveled like a spark. Classified. Half myth, half boast, not meant for a quiet cadet in a dead man's jacket. Vale lifted one hand, and the murmurs died at once. Her eyes narrowed, measuring more than fabric. When she looked back at Elena, there was something else in her expression, something private, almost pained. What unit did your father serve with the 97th Phantom Regiment? Ma'am. At least, that's what we were told. Vale froze. Surprise first, then respect, then reverence, the kind of look soldiers reserve for names etched into stone. Turn around, cadet. Elena obeyed. Vale's gaze moved over every faded stitch. Face me. She turned back and knew. This was no longer inspection. This was personal. Vale's voice rose, carrying across the yard. Your father didn't just serve in the 97th. A ripple of unease passed through the line. That patch on your sleeve, the one you wear without knowing, is from Whisperhawk Unit 7, Silent Falcon, one of the most classified shadow cells of the Eastern Corridor conflict. Behind her, Monroe and Dalton froze. Their smirks vanished. The entire yard held still, and Elena's world tilted. Whisperhawk. The name landed like a hammer in the silence. Elena had heard it once, whispered by veterans in half-finished sentences, as if speaking too much might still be dangerous. Colonel Vale stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to pull the formation forward. Your father was part of a 14-man shadow cell, 11 months behind enemy lines. They stopped a coordinated strike that would have crippled 3 U.S. installations. Without them, hundreds, maybe thousands would have died. Gasps rippled through the line. Faces drained of color. Vale's tone cut sharper. Only 4 returned alive. Major Gabriel Kessler was not one of them. Elena's breath caught. For years she had lived with silence told only her father had fallen in service. Now, 11 months. 4 survivors. The truth cracked through the wall she'd carried all her life. Vale reached into her coat and drew a slim leather folio. She flipped it open, not a medal, but stamped documents, heavy with redactions. This, she said, letting the inked pages catch the light, is the declassified citation. Your father earned the Iron Valor Cross for Legacy Operation 7. The record stayed sealed under Black Code until last year. That patch on your sleeve faded because it was designed to fade. Silent Falcons weren't meant to be remembered except by those who lived. Then, to the shock of every cadet, Vale straightened and delivered a perfect salute to Elena. The formation gasped. Monroe and Dalton looked carved from stone. Their arrogance shattered. Elena's eyes burned. She raised her hand and returned the salute, her motion trembling between pride and disbelief. I didn't know, she whispered. Of course you didn't, Vale said steadily. That was the point. Men like your father carried the burden so their families didn't have to. But now her voice lifted across Blackstone Yard, the silence ends. She turned on the formation. Voice like thunder. Let this be a lesson. You mocked what you didn't understand. You saw a faded uniform and assumed weakness. Cadet Kessler stands here wearing symbols that outrank every ribbon in this yard, including mine. Whisperhawk answered only to the Pentagon. Their authority superseded the chain of command. The weight of her words pressed down. Monroe and Dalton had gone pale, their bravado collapsing. Other cadets stared at Elena with something between awe and unease. Elena's mind spun. Her father wasn't just a folded flag. He was part of something near mythical, and she stood in the last thread of his uniform. Her voice cracked. What happened to him? Ma'am Vale's expression softened the first time the iron mask slipped. He was killed protecting a mountain village. Insurgents had discovered the team's position. He stayed behind, covering the retreat. His sacrifice allowed Whisperhawk to complete the mission. The intelligence saved countless lives. The yard fell silent, broken only by wind in the pines and the pop of distant rifles. Elena swallowed hard. Why didn't we know? Why didn't my family hear about the medal? Vale's gaze held hers. heavy as stone. Because he asked it, he made enemies who would have hunted his family for generations. Keeping you anonymous kept you alive. And then Vale leaned closer, voice low but deliberate. But circumstances have changed. The black code seal is lifted, which means Cadet Kessler. She let it hang, suspense sharpening the air. Your father's story can finally be told, and you are not here by accident. The formation shifted uneasily. Elena's heart pounded. Not here by accident. The yard stayed hushed, the weight of revelation pressing down like the Rockies behind the wire. Colonel Reagan Vale stood firm before Elena Kessler, gaze unyielding. "The enemies your father made," she said, voice low but cutting, were the kind that held grudges across generations. He insisted his family stay anonymous even in death. That secrecy kept you alive. Elena's throat tightened. She had grown up on silence half-truths. A folded flag, a uniform sealed in cedar. Now it all aligned in brutal clarity. Vale straightened, tone hardening back to command. Circumstances have changed. The networks that hunted Whisperhawk were dismantled 2 years ago. Their leaders are gone. The seal is lifted. Which means Major Gabriel Kessler's story can finally be told, and his family will finally be recognized. A ripple moved through the cadets. Monroe and Dalton's eyes widened. They had mocked not just a peer, but the daughter of a legend. "Monroe! Dalton!" Vale barked. "Step forward." They obeyed, reluctant, shoulders tight. "You mocked a silent falcon," Vale said flatly. "You ridiculed a legacy written in blood." Monroe tried. "Ma'am, you didn't know." Vale snapped, and instead of silence, "You chose mockery. That tells me everything I need to know." Dalton stammered. "We apologize. Not to me." Vale cut in. "To her, and to the memory of Major Kessler." Both turned, faces burning. Monroe's voice cracked. "Kessler, I was wrong." Dalton nodded. "I'm deeply sorry. We had no right." Elena held their eyes. "Respect is proven in actions. Remember that." Vale gave a sharp nod. "Dismissed." The formation broke. Boots echoed away until only 2 remained in the yard. "Kessler, walk with me." They moved beneath the oak at the far edge of Blackstone Yard. The mountains stacked in the distance. Vale's voice shifted, stripped of command. "Your father saved my life." Elena's breath caught. "I was the intelligence officer with Whisperhawk," Vale said. "When our position was compromised, he stayed behind, wounded, still firing, covering our escape." His last words to me, Vale's voice faltered, were, "Tell them it was worth it." "For 12 years, Vale admitted. She hadn't understood. But standing before Elena, the same resolve, the same bearing she finally did. Tears blurred Elena's vision, but she stood unbroken. "Ma'am, what happens now?" Vale's answer was steady. "Now you honor his legacy. Next month at Stonebridge Memorial, the Pentagon will posthumously award him the Iron Valor Cross. The citation you saw today becomes the medal in your mother's hands." Elena's breath hitched. "The highest award of gallantry. And there's more." Vale continued. "The Army has created a scholarship for Silent Falcon's children, full tuition, any academy. His sacrifice carries you forward." The weight shifted, no longer shame, but possibility. Then Vale leaned closer, voice urgent but steady. "Your father made me promise if he didn't return, I would watch over his family. Classification buried that promise for 12 years. Now I can keep it." She straightened, formality back. "The Pentagon is standing up a new legacy task force. They want children of legacy veterans, those who already know sacrifice. I'm offering you the chance to continue his work, when you're ready." The words hit like thunder, a path, a burden, a destiny. For a long time, Elena didn't speak. She felt the weight of her father's shadow pressing close, heavy but steady. To step into his world meant taking his risks, his secrecy, his sacrifices. To refuse meant letting the legacy stop with her. Vale's voice cut through the silence. Gentler now. You don't need to answer today. Just know the legacy lives on, not just in memory, but in mission. They turned back toward the main grounds, across the yard. Elena saw Monroe and Dalton drilling furiously, sweat streaking their collars. Every movement an attempt to earn back what they had thrown away. What will happen to them, she asked. They'll learn, Vale said simply. The Army has a way of grinding arrogance into humility. The question is whether they're willing. At the administration steps, Vale halted. She extended her hand. Eyes steady. Cadet Kessler. It's been an honor meeting Major Gabriel Kessler's daughter. He would be proud. Elena shook her hand firmly. Thank you, ma'am, for everything. Vale's sedan pulled away, leaving Elena alone on the stone steps. For the first time in years, the uniform on her shoulders didn't feel borrowed. It felt like armor, like trust. Weeks turned, but something had shifted. Word spread. Where once there had been whispers of mockery, there was silence, then respect. Cadets sought her out not for her name, but for her steadiness. She ran harder, shot cleaner, stood straighter, without speeches, without demands. Leadership began to follow her. And then came Stonebridge Memorial. Flags snapped in the wind. Elena stood between her mother and grandmother as the Iron Valor Cross was presented, gleaming in the autumn sun. The citation rang clear for conspicuous gallantry, for sacrifice beyond measure, for service in shadows that saved lives in the light. She wept, but she stood tall. Around her stood families of other Falcons, faces lined with the same silence, the same pride. Survivors spoke fragments of missions, small stories that, piece by piece, revealed the man behind the patch. For the first time, she didn't feel she was carrying a ghost. She was carrying a legacy. 1 year later, Elena stood at her commissioning ceremony, a second lieutenant now. In her hand lay a letter from the Pentagon. The new Legacy Task Force was real, and her name was on the roster. She thought of her father, of Vale's promise, of the risks waiting ahead. And she signed. Some legacies are inherited by blood. Others are chosen by character. Elena Kessler discovered the truest ones are carried by choice patches that may fade, but honor that never diminishes.